as you already know, I've been in this profession for 37 years now, going on 38. It's amazing that I must have started when I was 1. But I always remember there's certain times in my career that were sliding doors or forks in the road that I could have kept going down the path I was going, or I could have decided to go down another path. And many times those decisions come down your path and they ruffle the feathers, and it's normally associated with pain or embarrassment or something you did wrong or failure that gets you thinking about changing who you are and what you're thinking. And being in education now for 31 years and a trainer all my life, and I still train people to this day after 37 years, I always find it really interesting of how many times people will come to Kmax, for example, because something's happened in their life. They've had a light bulb moment where they want to become an exercise professional, or something's happening in their personal life where they say, hey, if I can do this, then maybe I can help other people do that. And some of those examples would be, say, for example, I'll ask, why are you considering to become an exercise professional? And they'll say something like, well, I lost 30 kilograms or I lost 20 kilograms. So something's in their life has happened where they're very proud of, which is fantastic. It requires discipline. And they said, well, if I can lose 30 kilos, then I can help other people lose 30 kilos and change their life as I've changed my life. Therefore, what they become, and whether that be ignorantly or whatever you want to call it, is they become an expert in their experience. And when they become an expert in their experience, they want to pass that on as if they're the expert. Now, many things in life is either cause and effect. Something happens and there's going to be an outcome of that. For every action, there's some form of reaction. So what may have happened in that scenario is that they decided that one day they're going to lose weight, for whatever reason that might be, and it might be because a painful event happened where their pants, none of their clothes fit them anymore, or they can't get out of bed, or they can't wipe their bum anymore, whatever it might be, it's going to be something painful, and they said, that's it, I'm going to lose weight. And they choose a path of how to lose that weight. And sometimes they would choose someone else's path, take their advice, or something they've seen on TV or something on social media, and it works because there's a cause and there's an effect. If I do this over a period of time, I find that my body loses weight. Therefore, because that's happened to them personally and they've gone through this quite emotional journey, they get very connected emotionally to that process. And they pop out the end saying, yes, I know how to lose weight. And because people will feed that process by saying, hey, you've lost a lot of weight. Can you share with me how to lose weight? And they say, sure, I'll teach you how to lose weight. And what they pass on is their experience. And the more people ask them, the more they share, that cause and effect process becomes more of a conviction of this is how you lose weight. And they take ownership of it, and they believe in it, and it becomes a conviction. And what's interesting is that when I ask them, what would you like to learn? And they'll say something like this, well, I already know everything about nutrition. And I think, wow, that's interesting. You know everything about nutrition because you've lost 30 kilos. And I always find that an interesting view because I don't know everything about nutrition. I've been doing this all my life and I've studied it to quite a high degree, and the more higher you go, the more confusing it actually gets. But my point being is they become a self-proclaimed expert in their experience, or they become an expert in other people's opinions, and then they pass that on. Now, a couple of things I've learned is if you put yourself off as a professional, an exercise professional, an expert, whatever it might be, then that opens up the door to allow me to ask you any question about that process. Because what people know is that there's a cause and an effect. But do they really understand the process between that? All the underlying mechanics that happen to make that happen? And is that the only way? Because when I take ownership of that, you take off the table any other option of finding a better way, a more efficient way, a safer way. I use an example. I could be watching the Olympics and I'd be watching the gymnastics and I'd be looking at the physiques of the gymnasts. And I go, oh my gosh, they're in incredible shape. So to get a physique like that, then I have to do gymnastics. So if I go and do gymnastics, that's the cause, because it worked for them. They did gymnastics and look what happened. They have this fantastic little muscular physique and lean. And yes, when they do that process, their body does change according to the stresses that's placed on it via doing gymnastics. And a part of that process is there's going to be a lot of relative strength activities. It's going to build their muscle. There's going to be lots of dieting and energy expenditure that's going to make them very lean. So the outcome is they end up with this magnificent body, which is very lean. And we go, well, if you want to lose weight, get muscular, have a physique like a gymnast, then go and do gymnastics. But what you're not considering is that's the cause and the outcome of the cause and effect. But that process in itself may not suit you as an individual, particularly if you're 6'7", particularly with you're prone for arthritic challenges. Because if you speak to any gymnast or retired gymnast, and I've been in the sporting game for a long time, you will find that their body is completely full of injuries. And they're not doing gymnastics anymore, and all they're doing is manage injuries. Because in that process, there was lots of stress placed on the body that caused injury. Yes, there's stress on the muscles that made the muscles build. There's stress in the cardiovascular and the respiratory system and the metabolic systems that made the body burn fat. But there's also all these stresses placed on the skeletal system that cause osteoarthritis, cause tendonitis, capsulitis, bursitis, any type of itis you want to come up with on the articular part of the body. Not to mention being dieting all their life. And they could also, particularly women who also have associated with that, eating disorders, their hormones go out of balance, they go on breaking drugs to in that process. There might be other performance-enhancing drugs. And before you know it, they come out with all these psychological, physiological, skeletal, hormonal challenges. So, and that's simple by not understanding, hey, yeah, everything will have a side effect, but we want to minimize those side effects. Now, just because you know this and that doesn't mean you understand the middle. When I was young, I had my very first car. When I was 17, I bought a Datsun 180B, a 1973 Datsun 180B. And any young, irresponsible lad, you don't look after it, you trash it, you drive it crazy, you don't service it. And before you know it, it started breaking down, it started rusting. And the end result was that it ended up in the trash heap. And I had to pay someone $50 to come and get it off the road because I couldn't drive it. But in that process, because I had it for 7 years, I got to know the idiosyncrasies of that Datsun 180B. So, for example, when the alternator was starting to fault, and I ended up with always having a flat battery, then I couldn't start the car. So I just adapted to that. So everywhere I drove, I'd park the car on a hill. And it was a manual, one of the old manuals, and then if I had to get going, I'd actually push start the car, but I didn't have to push it. I just hop in, unrelease the brake, it would roll down the hill, I'd put it in gear, put my foot in the clutch, put it in second gear, release the clutch, boom, off it would go, and it would start to chug away. And I just got around that limitation that the alternator wasn't recharging the battery. But ultimately when I drove it, the battery charged up a bit, then it went flat again. When the starter motor starting to play up, somehow through, I don't even know how I worked it out. It's crazy, but I sort of knew the car pretty well. So the car wouldn't start. So what I'd do, I'd open up the bonnet. I had a little spanner. And people would be amazed if they ever drove with me the first time and it wouldn't start. And say, oh, geez, your car's broken. Just don't worry, I'll work it out. I'd open up the bonnet, I'd get my spanner, I'd lean in the car. Simple engines, that's 180B, so I get the spanner and I'd actually physically bash, about 4 or 5 good bashes on the starter motor. I'll hop back in the car, boom, it'll start up again. And people go, wow, you must know a lot about engines. Well, I know nothing about engines. All I knew is that if I bashed the starter motor for some reason, it would just start up. Now, I didn't put myself out there as an expert, as a mechanic. I just worked out some cause and effects of how to get around the limitations of my car. So if I put myself as a mechanic, then I would know all the underlying reasons why my alternator was going flat, why my starter motor wasn't working, if the car was not going smoothly, it would like this a bit. I'd get the petrol filter, the little physical plastic thing, and I'd shake it up, and then it would be okay. And sometimes I'd empty it out and clean it out, and off I'd go. So yes, I learned about the idiosyncrasies and the cause and effects of that car, but I was certainly in no way, in shape or form, a mechanic. But what I find very interesting in this exercise profession is that people in the exercise profession, they do certain things, they get a cause and effect, and all of a sudden they put the badge of an expert on. I've lost 30 kilos, so I know everything about fat loss. And then if you're going to say that, that's fine, but then you're opening up the door for someone to say, well, if you know everything about a fat loss, so tell me what is the molecular structure of fats, and what's the difference in the molecular structure of a monounsaturated fat, a polyunsaturated fat, and a saturated fat. What is the molecular structure? And you'd find that people have no idea. But you're talking about something as if you know what it is. All you know is the cause and effect. Doesn't mean you understand the process. Because if you don't understand the process, you only know one way, and there's no flexibility in that, and you get emotionally attached to that way, and that's the only way. If you say, look, carbs are no bad for you, and I said, well, why? What is it about the carbohydrate, the molecular carbohydrate, that is actually bad for you, and what exactly is it bad for? How does it affect your systems in the body or the physiology of the body? And people won't be able to answer it, because all they're doing is just repeating what they heard from someone else. People tend to repeat other people's opinion, or they repeat their own experience and have an opinion about it. But if you actually ask deeply, tell me more about that and how does that work, you find though their face will go blank. And I say this because I've been there in my youth when people ask me questions about the exercise prescription or the programs or the exercise I deliver, and I just didn't know the answer. I had to make something up. If you talk about, hey, I always remember I was at a meeting with at a Fitness Australia meeting, and there was one of my former students there from many years ago, and Rory was there, and he was proclaiming about this new training regime he'd designed, which is great for the core. And he said to Rory, and I've shared this beforehand, he said, my training system, and he had a name for it, some sexy name, and he says, my training system works more of the core. And Rory asked this very innocent question, and she said, which ones and how much more? And the person just went blank. So if you're going to say core muscles, then you have to be able to answer which ones. And there's probably about 7 significant ones. And if you don't know the origin, insertion, the action, the function of those 7, and how they work in a cooperative way to stabilize the pelvis, the lower back, the intervertebral joints, and how they all work to stabilize that, then don't just hide behind a general term called the core, and this works more of the core. And if you're saying more, well, how much more are you referring to? And how is that actually measured? How do they measure more? Is it measured in centimeters? Is it measured in grams, kilograms, Fahrenheit, Celsius? Is it measured in EMG, electromyographical readings? So it's really interesting that people will throw out these blanket statements or general statements, but they won't pay enough attention to go a bit deeper to further understand it. And when I was a gym instructor, my first full-time gym instructor position at a gym called Lifestyle Gym about 120 years ago, it seems like. And because when I was on the system, university degrees weren't very common. There's only 2 universities in Australia that taught a degree in human movement studies. We used to call it the Mickey Mouse degree, because there was no positions once you finished it. So there's no career path because no one hired people. There was no profession for it. Gyms were bodybuilding type gyms, but this gym was one of the first modern gyms, and they put me on with a degree in human movement studies. And I got through that, and I got those lovely letters after my name, and I memorized and regurgitated everything to get to the degree, but I didn't remember anything or understand anything because no one taught me how to learn. I just memorized and regurgitated. And but at that same time, I got into bodybuilding, and being young, full of testosterone in my teenage years, and fairly good genetics back then. I just used to have to look at a weight and I whacked on muscle. So I was actually pretty buffed. I had a degree, so I had brawn, body, brain, according from the outside. So therefore, Deb McCoy, who's the manager of the gym, put me on. And before you know it, I'm a gym instructor there writing out programs. And I always remember this, is we had a staff meeting. There was about 12 staff. I was the new kid on the block, but the person with the degree. So Deb was quite proud to have me on board. And she was going through standardising programs. And she grabbed the program card and she says, let's have a look at a program. It was a random pick and happened to be my program. And she asked me, she says, okay, so let's have a program so we make sure we're all on the same page and we're all singing from the same hymn book. Kman, so if you look at here in the Kman, she said, you're doing this exercise. Back then I was doing bicep curls and all those crazy stuff. You're doing this incline, alternating, rotating bicep curl on an incline. Why are you prescribing that exercise? Now, being young and a little bit not so confident, a little bit insecure, new person on the block, I felt I was put in a corner to justify why I was giving that exercise. And I was thinking to myself, why she asked the question, how can I justify that exercise? And I just came up with, well, you know, when you're on the incline, you know, what it does, it gives you a better stretch across the bicep that lengthens the muscle, that increases the muscular hypertrophy of the muscle for the full range of the muscle. Therefore, you don't end up with a shortened muscle and tearing the muscle, and therefore you're going to get a long range muscle. And I came up with this thing that just sounded convincing, but it was just all bullamush. It was just all BS. And she listened to it and she says, wow, that's impressive. Thank you for that. And everyone was quite impressed with me for my made-up story. The challenge with that is that after it, I felt a bit dirty. I felt like I was a fake. I had this degree, but I just had to make up little bits of piece of information, which I read in muscle and fiction and the bodybuilding, and I put them all in one sentence to confuse everyone, to self-justify my own ego and my vanity that I knew what I was doing. And after that, I thought, well, if I'm going to do this for the rest of my life, maybe I should really have a deep understanding of how this works. Not just the muscular system, but all the systems in the body. So, and I was always preparing myself to be able to answer that question that was asked of me from a client and not have to give them a bullshit story. To be able to answer using logic, using science, using anatomy. And a lot of people will make comments and have a very strong opinion about things they know very little about. Most people say far more than what they know. And I always said, when I speak, I want to be able to speak with confidence and have firm ground. So if someone asks me the justification of that, then I could come up with a common sense, anatomical, physiological, biomechanical reason for it. It doesn't mean it's right, but at least I have some firm discussion to have rather than just coming up with big words. So tonight, whether the topic is core or carbs, or whether it be fat burning or the immune system, I'm going to cover all the main systems tonight so you can have a better understanding how they all work together as a holistic approach. Obviously we're on limited time, so I can't spend a massive time on any one of the systems, but I want to give you a broad view of it so you don't live as an exercise professional doing cause and effect. You do this, I get that. And bodybuilders are the same. They do lots of different exercises. They do heaps and heaps of training. There's heaps of side effects. Long-term means overtraining, wear and tear in the joints, arthritis, torn tendons, torn muscles, all sorts of stuff. But they get this big physique and everyone says, well, wow, how'd you get that? And many times they do so many things in that process, they don't actually know what actually caused the effect because they're doing so many things. I could say, I need to lose weight. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go for a run every morning for 30 minutes. And at the end of the 30 minutes, I'm going to do 30 crunches. And then I'm going to do meditation for 10 minutes. And then after 4 weeks or so, I lose a lot of weight. And people say, wow, Kman, you've lost a lot of weight. What have you been doing? How'd you lose the weight? I says, oh, geez, those crunches, they just burn the fat off my tummy, I tell you. Or I could say, that 10 minutes of meditation, they really gets rid of the fat off my tummy. So because I'm doing multiple things, many times if you don't understand the underlying mechanics or the physiology anatomy, sometimes you give credit to the wrong thing because you're doing multiple things. Many times it just might be I'm just eating less. but I'm doing all these series of silly exercises, but I'm also, because I'm doing the silly exercises, I'm also reducing my calories because I'm more conscious of my health, therefore I lose the weight, but I give the credit to the silly exercises or the silly thing that I'm doing, but I'm doing lots of different things. So what's important is that you have the ability to go under the surface to be able to see, okay, what is actually causing this? And there's cause and effect, but what is the process? And then that's going to give you flexibility when things don't go right. If you get an injury or you hit a training plateau or you're not getting the results that you wanted originally, because most people get results to start with and then they start to plateau and they don't have the ability to get outside their lane to see there are other better ways that can take them to a higher level of achievement, whether it be nutrition, or whether it be training, or whether it be performance, or whatever, or health, or whatever it might be. We tend to hold on to our convictions. That stops us from learning all these other things that we can learn. And that's why, in Max, I always say, I'm not here to teach you what to think. I'm here to teach you how to think. And a great day for me is when I've been proven wrong. Because someone can prove me wrong. Once I get proven wrong, I prove myself wrong a lot of the time. And Rory does that because she always asks these very confrontational questions about why are you doing that and how does that work? Please explain that. And I think, well, that's a very good question because I've been saying that for so long I just believe it without actually questioning it. Many times it's good to question your current knowledge before you seek new knowledge, because it's no use laying new knowledge on old wrong knowledge, because all you're doing is building a bigger wrong. So let's have a look at the systems in the body. And I guess it's like a car. A car has, and obviously the body's a lot more complicated than the car, but just because I knew how to hit the starter motor and jump start the car down a hill and I had this own idiosyncrasies doesn't mean I knew how the car worked. But a car, like everything, it has all different systems in it. It has obviously the electrical system, it has the fuel system, and has the structure and all those things. And the body is very, very much similar. So let's get underneath the bonnet of the body and start to analyze how they all work. And you've already covered the systems. And in fitness, we tend to just focus on the muscular system. And that's what we tend to work on. We tend to ignore all the other systems. And we don't have a good understanding of the endocrine system, the nervous system, whether it be the lymphatic system. But they're all really, really important. And we just focus on, yes, lift heavy weight, get big muscles. But we don't know what actually causes the muscle growth. We don't know what actually causes when the muscle stops growing. Or we don't actually know what happens when we injure the muscle by doing the same thing. Because all we're limiting ourselves is cause and effect. Lift weights, get big. Run a lot, lose weight. Starve yourself, lose weight. And that's it. Many times that's what the general public and a lot of exercise professionals, because I'm sure if you ask them the origin and insertions of all the major muscles they're talking about, they won't be able to answer it. I'm sure if you ask them, the biochemical makeup or the molecular makeup of all the macronutrients, they won't be able to answer it. I'm sure if you ask them, how does the process of turning carbohydrate into fat, how does that actually happen from a molecular point of view? How do you take an apple and turn it into butter? How does that actually work from a molecular point of view? It doesn't just happen. Something has to happen in between that. Do you understand that process and the limitations of that process? And obviously the explanation of that process, and be able to make it sound simple, that process called de novo lipogenesis. So when we look at the body, there's two responses. There's a response or a reaction. We have a voluntary response or we have an involuntary response. And depending which situation, each one of those determines which system is triggered first. So let me go through the voluntary response. The voluntary response is I decide to exercise or I decide to do something. So it's a decision. I'm sitting here and I go, I might go for a run. That's my decision. That is voluntary. Means I make that decision and then I activate the systems accordingly to get that process occurring. Before you know it, I'm out running and my body's in that physiological state of metabolism at a high level. So that's the first system, the voluntary system. Then you have the involuntary. The involuntary is that I'm sitting here chatting to you and all of a sudden in the window behind me, right there's a window, I see this massive grizzly bear just running for me. It's just about to jump through the window. And all of a sudden I go, shit! Now that's what we call involuntary. It means I didn't decide that. An action an external action created an internal reaction. And that's a different process. That's the fight and flight process. The fight and flight process is a survival process that, when the caveman's walking along the bush and all of a sudden a tiger jumps out, they have this fight-flight process where the body ignites itself in preparation to fight the tiger or flight. And it does that very, very quickly. It's not like, well, will I fight the tiger or won't I? I don't know if I'm in the mood. Oh, maybe I might flight it. No, maybe I might fight it. No, I don't have. It is purely reactive. And that's a different process. It still involves all the systems, but it actually activates in a different way. And the two messenger systems in the body, there's two systems in the body which are the messengers that gets the body going. The first one is the nervous system. The nervous system is I decide I'm going for a run. So that's the voluntary. I'm sitting here, I'm thinking, oh, should I or shouldn't I? Geez, I haven't had a run, I'm getting a bit chubby. Oh, I've got a competition coming up, I should get fit. And all of a sudden, I make that decision. So when I make that decision, that's activated by this nervous system, right? And it sends neurological messages out to the body, to the muscles to get me going. And I'll go through that process. On the other hand, which I'll cover second, is the involuntary system. Means that grizzly bear jumps at me, all of a sudden, ha! It's shock, it's fear. And and that fear has created fight or flight or freeze. Fight means I fight back. Flight means I run. Freeze, I freak out on the spot. And the first system that gets triggered there is the hormonal system. And the hormonal system sends messages via chemicals, right? The nervous system kicks in, but first of all, it's hormonal. You get that butterflies in the guts and you get this, and sometimes it can be a combination of both, naturally. From being a martial artist and fought many, many competitions, when I had the nervous system, I decided to go on the mat to fight, but also you have that unknown, that little bit of fear, which keeps you, that anxiety, and all of a sudden you get the butterflies and all that, the sicky and the shivers. So you got two happening together. So that's a combination of two. So let's have a look start with the voluntary process of action. And this is my decision to take action. So the first system is the nervous system, as you're full aware of. And the nervous system consists of the central nervous system being the brain, right, and the spinal cord. And then you have all the peripheral nerves that go out to the limbs of the body. So I send messages via my nerves, my peripheral nerves, and I send a motor impulse, right, or nerve impulse, or sometimes called a action potential. Means it's the potential to create an action. And that's voluntary. I decide to pick up this pen, put it down. Pick up this weight, put it down. Go for a run, one leg after the other. And that's the nervous system. As a part of the nervous system, as you know, that sends the messages out. But the nervous system has to make decisions. So those decisions can only be made based on feedback. And feedback can be external feedback in the eyes, means a truck goes this way, so I decided to steer that way, or whatever it might be. So that's external feedback. But I also need internal feedback in the engine itself, and that's where we get feedback from my sensory organs. And the main sensory organs, and there's receptors in your joint, in the muscles and the joints. So right now, I'll put my arm back and I'll flex now I can't see what I'm doing, but I can flex my fingers at 90 degrees and I take it up, and I don't need to see that. I wriggle my thumb, I wriggle forward, I wriggle back. I don't have to see that to do that. I know exactly where everything is because of these amazing receptors in my joints that gives me feedback of spatial awareness, which is quite incredible, really. I can still feel my way with that with closing my eyes. I can close my eyes and you say flex my elbow, I'll flex it 90 degrees, I'll flex it 90 degrees, and I'll be able to do that because of that internal feedback mechanism. I also have the sensory organs, as you're already familiar with, is the muscle spindle, which is more placed in the muscle belly, and it actually senses the rate of lengthening of muscle, so it's a protective mechanism so I don't overstretch and tear a muscle. And I won't get too much into that, but they're sensory organs that you need to be aware of, particularly if you're going to take a muscle beyond its normal range for martial arts, kicking high. It's not just about flexibility of the muscle, because a muscle will only go as far as the nervous system will allow it. It's not about muscular. Everyone thinks flexibility is all muscular, but it's actually neural, because when you stretch a muscle, for example, you get that funny neural pain, that numb pain. That's why a lot of people don't like stretching, because it's not muscular, it's more neural. You're stretching the nervous system. And you have to stretch the nervous system, and you have to also condition those sensory organs, being the muscle spindle, to increase its threshold to that stretch. And the body will adapt, where you only stretch a certain way and the muscle spindle goes, oh no, you're going to tear me, so it kind of contracts the muscle. But with conditioning and progression, you can desensitize the muscle spindle to allow that muscle to lengthen more. I know, knowing doctors or surgeons on the operating table, they can, if you're under a general anesthetic, they can take your limbs and move it anywhere, because the nervous system has been inactive, so therefore all of a sudden you can move your limbs anywhere. But when you're conscious and the nervous system's functioning, you can't move your limbs anywhere near as far as that. That's because of the loop back system in your sensory organs. And then you've got the Golgi tendon organ, which senses the amount of force being generated in the muscle. So when you generate so much force, where you're trying to lift too much weight or too a heavy force, and you're going to tear the muscle, then the muscle will close itself down, because it sends a message back to the central nervous system saying, if you keep trying to generate this amount of force, then we're going to injure ourselves. Therefore, it shuts it down. And then if you understand that, then you can understand the limitations of flexibility and the limitations in strength. And it's not always muscular. It's not always the size of the muscle, the contractile force of the muscles. Many times it's the neural drive. You get a card, it's not the size of the engine. It's how the engine's wired that would determine how fast it goes. So more cylinders, V8s, V10s, does mean faster. Porsche is a high performance car, but it's only a 6-cylinder car, but it's so efficient in how it's designed and how it's wired, it can still beat most V8s or V10s or V12s. So it's not just the size of the engine, it's the wiring of the engine that can determine strength. For example, for an elite athlete, you don't have to be big to be powerful, you don't have to be big to be strong, particularly if you have a great wiring, a neurological wiring, where you have a great neuromuscular system that's been conditioned to express force using neural drive rather than just pure mass. And that will give you a bit of an understanding when you start working with elite athletes and how to get them powerful, how to get them faster, because it's not just limited to muscle. And muscle is important by all means, because that is the engine, but you can actually desensitize the sensory organs so the muscle can express more force, and you can increase the motor unit recruitment, the synchronization of firing of the motor units, the code rating or the firing rate of the motor units. You can inhibit the antagonist, which is the brake that stops. And when you understand all those other mechanics of force development, only one of them is muscle. There's about other 7 which are more neurological changes or neurological adaptations that determines the amount of force a muscle can express. So the nervous system will fire up the muscles, it will fire up the digestive system, will fire up the cardiovascular system, will fire up the respiratory system, will fire up all the systems. So that's looking at the nervous system, and I just use some examples of how, if you understand that, in certain circumstances, you can answer questions logically from an anatomical base. When someone says, why is that person so strong but he's not so big, and that person's so big but not so strong? Well, now you've got to understand it might be more than just the muscle, that it might be the nervous system, and it could also be the skeletal system, which is the biomechanics, because we know biomechanics plays a big role when it comes to lever lengths and angles of how much force you can express. So it's not just one. You have to look at how they all work together to get the best result for a client, but also explain results, the outcome or the cause and effect, to explain why are they getting that, and is there a better way to get that. There might be a better way to dig a hole than with a spoon. Maybe I'll get a shovel. Maybe I'll get a longer shovel to get more leverage rather than a little short shovel. And yeah, I'll get the hole dug, but geez, it's going to take forever to dig a hole. It's like digging a You know, I could actually dig a swimming pool in my backyard with a spoon. Yeah, it worked. And if I did that, because I put so much work in it, and it ends up being a good pool, and everyone said, wow, Kman, great pool. Geez, you worked hard. Yes, I worked really hard to dig that pool. I get emotionally, how'd you do that? With a spoon. That's the only way to do it. And if I get emotionally attached to that, I actually won't look at other ways to be able to dig that hole or that pool in a better, effective way. Now, it seems to be everyone's gone still on me. JP, can you just say something so I know that I've still got you online?
I'm here. Hello.
Awesome. Okay. I just got a freeze frame. Everyone's sort of doing that to me. So obviously, I'm glad you can still hear me. So let's have a look at the next system. So that starts with the nervous system. Then the nervous system activates, obviously, the muscular system and all the other systems. So if I'm looking at movement, for example, the nervous system fires the muscle system. The muscular system starts to contract and starts to activate the muscles to pull the insertion towards the origin. And that's where it's important to make sure you know all the muscles, the significant muscles that's involved in our profession or the goals of your clients, to get a deeper understanding so you know what muscles are working, how they're working for them to achieve the results they want to achieve, whether that be building muscle or building strength or building tone, which is a bit of an airy-fairy term, or building speed, or or rehabilitation or realignment of joints, or for posture, or whatever it might be, or to spark metabolism, to increase energy expenditure. So it's really important to know your muscles and their role. Obviously, the main role of muscles is obviously movement and action. It pulls on bones. It's there for posture. And you have to know the muscles to get the posture in the right position. And obviously, muscles also produce heat, so it keeps our body warm. So we all know, most people know about the muscular system, but I would question whether you really have a good understanding of origins, insertions, functions and actions of all the muscles. And I'd encourage you to know that. I would expect that if you're saying, hey, we're going to work the chest muscles, that I now have a right as your client to say, what are the chest muscles? What's their origin and insertion? What's their action and function? And how is this exercise delivering on the goal that I want to achieve? Or you just give me this exercise because it's a fashionable exercise or because everyone else is doing it. You'd have to be able to justify your prescription. Like any professional would, you have to be able to justify what you're doing, not just for, hey, this gets you big, but hey, why are we doing this and how does that exactly work? Take me through the anatomical and physiological process of why we're doing this exercise, and are there any side effects of injury or limitations that occur down the track? So it's like I could say I want to get in shape, so the best way to get in shape is go and play rugby league. Yeah, I get in shape, but my body will be hammered and beaten up by tackles and injuries and all sorts of stuff. Yeah, it gets the result, but there's all the side effects. I may not want to live with those side effects, as if I was doing gymnastics, particularly at my age, at 55 years of age. I would pass on that one. I would find safer, better, more effective and efficient ways to get the same result using my knowledge of anatomy and physiology and biomechanics without putting that trauma through my body. Now, the muscles, as you know, they contract and they move the skeletal system. They move the skeletal system, which are comprised of, obviously, the bones, the and all the joints. And we're all very familiar with the movement. But a lot of people aren't also familiar with the other roles that the skeletal system has, because the skeletal system is not a dormant organism. It's a very dynamic organism. We know that if you don't use it, you suffer from osteoporosis. So it's really important to understand the role of muscle conditioning or muscle work on how it affects the bone mineral density, which is made of calcium and phosphorus and held together with collagen. And I'm sure you already know that. And what types of stresses, controlled progressive stretches you should put on the skeletal system via the action of the muscular system that's going to give the best, safest effective effect of increasing bone mineral density, considering that 1 in 3 women after 65 suffer from osteoporosis, 1 in 8 men suffer from osteoporosis, and those figures are climbing due to the sedentary lifestyle that we have. It's certainly not from undernourishment, because if anything, most people are overnourished. You just got to look at their bellies and their bodies to see that, but it's more the inactivity. So we need to intervene with some controlled exercise that's going to be conducive to building bone mineral density, particularly in the sites that people are predisposed to osteoporosis, particularly for women, which would tend to be in the hip. And people say, yeah, it's the hip, but what part of the hip? Well, to be specific, if you know your anatomy, it should be the neck of the femur, that is the prime site. And then the other sites will include, obviously, the lumbar vertebrae, which is the body of the vertebrae. That's also a prime site. And if you start seeing those old people when they've got that kyphotic position, they're really rounded shoulders. People say, haven't they got poor posture? Well, that's a little bit of ignorant statement. It's not poor posture. What's basically happened is they suffered so much from osteoporosis in the bodies of the thoracic spine. The bodies have actually collapsed on each other, and they've collapsed like an old building. It's just all collapsed, and all of a sudden they're in this position. So that's a result of osteoporosis. And it's important to understand that. So how can I train that? How can I not add to that challenge? How can I not add to the internal destructions that has already been created on the skeletal system? How can I prevent that for young people coming through? And how's the best way to control that? A lot of people say, for do weight-bearing exercise, go for a walk. Well, walk that's not going to reduce osteoporosis because the load's not heavy enough. You're only using your own weight, which is the same as your relative weight, and you're going for a low-intensity walk. What you need is an overload, a progressive and controlled overload, and that could be expressed through controlled weight training and doing a leg extension. Well, that's not going to work because that doesn't place the stresses on those prime sites of the neck of the femur or the lumbar vertebrae. So doing anything on the ground, well, that's insignificant because you're not putting those compression forces through those sites in that functional position. People say swimming. Well, swimming is your body weight is supported by the water, so that's going to be the best for osteoporosis because you don't have that external loads applied onto those prime sites. So it's important to understand where the prime sites are, how they function, and what's the best load to apply it in the greatest biomechanical alignment with the load that is progressive. And that could be starting with strength training. And then we also know that impact training also has a great effect on osteoporosis. So that doesn't mean go running or do gymnastics. It might just be doing little simple hops on the spot, one leg hops, so you get that little impact, right, which is good for increasing bone mineral density. And we already know that, so we want to combine strength work with impact. But you may not start with the impact until they have the strength to control the joints to withstand the impact of the jumping. So again, your skeletal system is also vital and important because that's your structure, that's the coat hanger of your body. The other aspect that a lot of people don't understand about the skeletal system is a significant role in the production of red blood cells and white blood cells. So if you looking at particularly at this time when you have this virus going through the world, and your immune system is very much dependent upon your bone marrow. And so if you have this osteoporotic wearing out, you're suffering from osteopenia, which is the reduction of bone mineral density with the aging process, and you're going into that version of osteoporosis where you're not just wearing out the bone, but you're also destroying the factory that produces red blood cells for cardiovascular capillarization, and I'll show you how all these link up together, but you're also destroying the factory that produces your white blood cells that fights off disease and fights off viruses. So at the moment we have all these this virus going around, and as you know, if you dig down through the statistics, not always what the media or the government feeds you, but to actually go into the numbers, you probably realise that probably 99 or 95+% of the people who are getting this virus and dying from it have these common themes. A, they're elderly. They're normally north of 70. B, they have all these metabolic and system diseases. They have diabetes. They have coronary heart disease. They have immune disease. They have all these respiratory diseases. And the reason why they're so susceptible because their body can't fight off an intruder. because it's not just the immune system, it's all the other systems, because they're all connected. The immune system is only as strong as all the other systems. If your skeletal system is down the toilet hole, you haven't got an immune system, because your body's not producing white blood cells to fight anything off. You're destroying your own soldiers to fight the intruders. So a lot of the time we say, oh, we need to give you an anti-vaccine and all that bit. Well, the best anti-vaccine is to go and exercise and build up all your systems, not just the muscle, but the bones, because the bones isn't just an imminent object that holds you for your muscles to attach to. It's a vital component of the production of red blood cells for cardiovascular training and cardiovascular efficiency. And if you want to get the blood down to the deeper cells of the body, and you want to get the red blood cells and the white blood cells down to the deeper cells of the body, then you have to capillarize those cells by activation of your cardiovascular system. So now we've got the nervous system that activates the muscular system that then moves the skeletal system. And in that same cooperative, you're also, because the body's going through this voluntary stress, because you're applying the stress on it voluntary, and when you've got a stress, the body goes out of its homeostatic state into the state of, hey, we have to create some physiological changes to meet the need of what you're asking of the body. And the messengers, there's the nervous system, but the metabolic messengers, so the muscular messengers would be the nervous system, but the metabolic messengers is the endocrine system that releases the chemicals and releases the hormones from the glands and floods into the body, into the cardiovascular system, to go and transported via the cardiovascular system down to the cells of the body to create some physiological changes. So the hormonal system, or the endocrine system, and the hormones is the trigger to trigger physiological changes. And I use this analogy, the glands that holds the hormones. The glands that holds the hormones is like a matchbox. And the hormones are the matches in it. And the energy in the fireplace would be the muscle. And the energy in the muscle is the wood and the paper in the fireplace. And I want to activate the fireplace. I want to activate the fireplace, light the fire to get heat and energy. So to do that, I have to take the match out of the matchbox. I have to take the hormone out of the gland, transport it with my hand through the cardiovascular system, through the vessels, and I strike the match, and then I light the paper, which is in the muscle or the fireplace, that ignites the metabolic process of energy production. If I want to speed that up, then I throw on it petrol that speeds that metabolic process up. And petrol in the body is like your enzymes, which are proteins that speed up the metabolic processes of the endocrine system to get the engine going. It's the trigger to get the engine going. Yes, the central nervous system is the key, and then you get all these chemical reactions happening in the body to get the petrol burning and the cylinders firing and the spark plugs burning. So that's how the endocrine system integrates. It gets activated with muscle action or stress, any form of stress, whether it be deliberate and voluntary or involuntary or internal stress. Internal stress is I see a bear running at me and I go, ha! That's internal stress. External stress, so that's external stress creating an internal stress. Many times I create an internal stress to create an external stress, means I create my internal stress to go running. So the endocrine system is vital in this whole process because it links everything together. It actually gets all the metabolic processes occurring. So you have obviously your action hormones, which is your catecholamines, which is a catabolic hormone that breaks cells down and opens cells up. So it gets your body ready for action. So when you're stressed by, fight or flight, then your body will release catecholamines, catecholamines in the body. It will release cortisol. Cortisol is a catabolic hormone. Cortisol, catecholamines, what they do is they open up the cells of the body. So the body will release from the cells the fats, it will release the carbohydrates and even the proteins into the bloodstream, because it's no use having the energy in the storage cells. The energy needs to be in the muscle. So it needs to get it out of the little petrol tanks, put it into the cardiovascular system so it can transport your carbohydrates and your fats and even some of your proteins down to the muscle, where it actually starts to be used as energy through the process of the cells, the engines called the mitochondria, which you're already very familiar with, I'm sure, and that process all burnt up through what we call the Krebs cycle. But what triggers all these is hormones triggers the release. Your catecholamines release opens up the cells of the fat cells and the glycogen cells, and then it sends it down to the mitochondria, and hormones trigger that process as well. So hormones are the triggers that get all these little things happening, the metabolic processes happening. But that all comes with, obviously, and sometimes it can be external. We know that when you, if you're in cold conditions, it places a stress in the body, so the body will spark its metabolism up to increase heat production by increase its metabolism, and that's all triggered by the hormones in the body through cold. And you start to shiver, and that's all increasing metabolism to try to warm the body up to fight against the coldness of the external environment. So, yes, it's really important not just to say, hey, pick a weight, lift a weight. When I'm lifting weights, yes, I'm going to be releasing the energy to lift that weight, which is I open up the glycogen stores to lift it. I use the ATP-CP system, adenosine triphosphate. That's all triggered by enzymes and hormones to produce the energy. But then after that, once I've lifted the weight, and once the body goes through that catabolic state, because that's breaking the cells down through the release of cortisol. So the body breaks itself down to release the energy and the substrates of energy to use to move the muscles and drive the cardiovascular system and drive the respiratory system to perform the work, to get the work done. But once that's done, then your body goes into recovery and regeneration and supercompensation. And that's where once you've gone through that process, then you go into an anabolic state of rebuilding. And now because you've applied that stress and there's that post-stress trauma after that training, then the body says, I need to be stronger next time so I can withstand that trauma better the next time. So then we'll go into releasing the anabolic hormones, such as testosterone and human growth hormones, to start to build the tissue and expand the lungs and increase your stroke volume in your cardiovascular system and improve your neural drive and increase your number of motor units and lay down more actin and myosin filaments in each of the fibers in the muscle and build muscle hypertrophy. And not to mention the brain, where we'll start to release the chemicals, brain-derived neurotropic factors, which is like fertilizer to the brain to build the connections in the brain and rebuild brain cells, which we thought never could happen, but we know it does happen, but it happens through exercise. So the hormonal system but the hormonal system has to be given the right stimulus so it can produce the right outcome, and then it can produce the right overcompensation. And we'll talk more about that when we start wrapping this up in the form of training. And obviously when you eat food, that creates a stress in the body. It creates a stress in the digestive system. And because that food gets absorbed into the cardiovascular system, it creates a stress in the vascular system. So straight away, the body says, okay, I need to go into an anabolic state to lay all these extra substrates which I have in my blood, which is glycogen, in the blood is glucose, fats and proteins. So the body will release an anabolic hormone called insulin. And insulin is involved in opening up the cells of the body to put energy into the cells, where catecholamines opens up the cells of the body to take energy out for action or for in that catabolic state, where insulin is anabolic. It actually opens the cells to lower your blood sugar levels or your blood glucose levels, to lay down more protein to build muscle. And it also stores fat too, because fat goes from the vascular system or the vessels, the blood, into the fat cells with the aid of your, obviously your insulin. And obviously that's also triggered by other enzymes, all the different enzymes that speed up that process, which I've already discussed. So that's looking at the hormonal system, and integrated with that, you have the respiratory system naturally and the cardiovascular system that all works together. In the voluntary state, when you start using muscles, the muscles needs to produce energy. To produce energy aerobic, it needs oxygen. So straight away, your respiratory kicks into action to take more oxygen in, and it needs to get that oxygen to the working muscles. So the heart starts pumping more to absorb the oxygen from the lungs through diffusion from the lungs, the alveoli, into the blood. And then that gets transported down to the cells, to the mitochondria, where through diffusion, through partial pressure, it diffuses from the blood into the cells of the body to use oxygen to serve the fireplace, which we talked about, because fire needs oxygen to burn, to produce energy, and the byproduct of that is actually heat production. So it's a sequential triggering of all the systems, and some are triggered one after the other, and one are triggered in the same time. So respiratory cardiovascular system will be triggered, but that gets into action through muscle movement, energy demand, release of hormones. Hormones open up the cells of the body, activates the respiratory system, activates the cardiovascular system, gets your breathing heavy, deep, get the oxygen in. In the other avenue, which you talked about, the involuntary, I can be stressed about something, and there's no energy demand, but I'm stressed about it. Like I'm stressed about the potential of that. I'm stressed about the potential of that grizzly bear jumping through my window. I'm stressed about going into an exam. I'm stressed about at the start of a competition before I start the competition. I'm stressed about it. I'm anxious about it. And then what happens is my body starts to prepare itself for fight and flight. So even though there's no energy demand, my breathing rate goes up, activated by hormones. My heart rate goes up, activated by hormones. My blood supply goes up. My blood supply down to the peripheral, the dilation into the right areas goes up. My body will shut off vasoconstrict blood to the digestive system and dilate blood to the muscular system, because that's where it's needed. It's not needed in the digestive system. That's why I start to feel sick in the tummy, or butterflies, or nerves, or bees in the tummy, because I'm shutting down the digestive system to open up the muscular system, because it's not my digestive system that's going to win me the 100-meter sprint. It's going to fight off the grizzly bear. So understanding how the body integrates all of these systems together is going to be very helpful in understanding why people go through what they go through. And if they go through this stress and they don't use that energy, and they don't use those muscles, and they don't use those hormones, and they don't use those enzymes, and they don't use that oxygen, then they're going to be not in a place of ease. They're going to be diseased, and that will lead to an imbalance in the homeostatic space of your body that will lead to significant effects: high blood sugar levels, high blood fats, blood lipid profiles, muscle tension, clogging up the arteries, coronary heart disease. You have high blood sugars that deteriorates the inner lining of the blood vessels, particularly the peripheral cells of the body and the capillaries, and therefore that deteriorates the capillaries. Therefore, blood can no longer serve those areas, so the muscle tissue starts to die because it's been starved of oxygen and nutrients. So if you have all this chain reaction, you want to make sure you get it into this action state, then you want to return it back to its homeostatic place, where everything starts to work together again at a higher level of performance. And talking about that, when you are training in cardiovascular exercise or strength training, all of those changes, those physiological changes, the capillarization of the cells, the increased blood supply, the increased heart rate, the increased stroke volume, the increased muscle density, all of these are building not just these systems, but particularly your immune system, because you're building more white blood cells. You're clearing out the bacteria out of your lungs on a regular basis. So you're cleansing the system. You can now transport the vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, phytochemicals down to the deeper tissues of the muscle, because you've got more capillarization. You're delivering all your warriors, your soldiers, your white blood cells down to those cells to fight off any virus or intrusion. You can't fight a war where all your soldiers are back in camp. They've got to be out in the field fighting off the perimeter of where or the intruders are coming in. And obviously linking that into what's happening at the moment, you have a bigger army, you have a more equipped army, you have a more spread out army, they're out on the periphery so no one can invade, you're protecting the borders, and anything comes in gets squashed really, really quickly. And that's not from taking some pharmaceutical drug. Obviously, that might be a short-term solution if someone's sick with a virus. But the question is, why did they lose the battle in the first place? Well, they started breaking down all the defense mechanisms: the skeletal system, the respiratory system, the cardiovascular system, the muscular system, the hormonal system. All of them are completely. There's an old people say, look, I use these ones. These are common ones. I've got I'm overweight because my hormones are off. Well, what happened? Did your hormones go off, got you overweight, or did you get overweight that stuffed up your hormones? And I'd say it's probably the latter in many, many cases. You actually set up you dug your own hole, and because you're in a hole, you actually dug it by letting your body and all these magnificent systems in the body fall down and fall apart. So, and obviously integrated in that, you have the digestive system, which is obviously where you get your nourishment, your vitamins and minerals and phytochemicals, and all your macro and micronutrients, and your fibre and all your fluid all comes through here. So you're going to make sure that's all healthy. And it's amazing how when you exercise, and the one common thing is if you exercise with good quality exercise that builds all these systems, builds the muscular system, builds the hormonal system, builds the neural system, builds the digestive system. Good exercise brings everything back into alignment. I was saying to yesterday at our online chat is that in your body you have all these amazing mechanics, and what they would do is they would do what you do. So if you sit on the couch eating chips, watching Netflix, and that's all you do, then all your internal mechanics will do the same thing. They'll sit on their couch eating chips and they won't service your engine and all the systems of the engine. But the best way to get them off the couch is you get off the couch and you apply a prescribed, controlled, progressive stress in the body, understanding the cause and effect of building muscle. What cause do I have to put in, what intervention I have to put in, and what effect? If I want to build cardiovascular health, what is my intervention, my cause, and what is the effect? Understanding the process. That way you won't do too much of one or not of the other, or you do a cause that doesn't have any effect, or a cause that will have an ill effect, will have a side effect that will stop you from creating that cause anyway. So if you start doing exercise or training with weight training, and you pick all unsafe, biomechanically unsound exercises that works the muscle, but stresses the joints by applying shearing forces, rotational forces, momentum forces, long lever movements. Yes, you work the muscle and you get a short-term effect until your joints fall apart. And then you won't be able to... It's no use driving the engine and you're wearing out the tread, wearing out the axle, wearing out the brakes. Because if you do that, yes, you're driving the engine, but the side effects will stop you from driving the car in the long run anyway. So you have to drive the car where everything's a win-win-win-win. It has to be a win for the cardiovascular system, it has to be a win for the respiratory system, it has to be a win for the muscular system, it has to be a win for the skeletal system, it has to be a win for the hormonal system. If you start starving yourself to lose weight, then you'll lose the weight, but there's going to be a loss for the muscular system because you lose muscle. There'll be a loss for the skeletal system because you lose your bone mineral density. There'll be a loss of the hormonal system because your hormonal system will be completely out of whack, going into survival mode, trying to survive through the famine like the hunter and gatherer did. It's going to be a loss for the nervous system because you're going to start to get the jitters and you're going to be unnourished. You're going to be lost psychologically. So you may get one win, but you're going to get all these other losses. You may go and do bodybuilding and train 6 days a week, 2 hours a day, doing all the exercises, and you may take some bit of added wheat bix in a syringe on top of that, and all of a sudden you get a win for the muscular system, and you look big and muscly and all sorts of stuff. But later on, your joints are worn out. Later on, your tendons are worn out. Later on, you've got coronary heart disease from taking steroids. Later on, you've got these, you're suffering from megorexia. So no matter how big you get, you still think you're small. So these psychological challenges. You get all these other side effects. So be careful that as an exercise professional, when you stimulate one system, it has a corresponding effect on all the other systems. So you have to be very careful of what medicine or what drug or what intervention you put on that particular system, and making sure that it doesn't have adverse effects. It can't be a win, loss, 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 loss. It has to be a win, 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 win. Now, I understand in extreme situations, say in elite sport, then you accept those risks. I accept that if I'm going to be a martial artist, then I'm going to have to do techniques that would not be or not advised for the average person. If I'm doing spinning hook kicks or whatever it might be, but I'm going to try to do them as safe and as effectively as possible. But I understand there's going to be some added risks. If I play rugby league, then I understand that I'm going to be tackled and I have to have a level of strength above the normal person, and there may be some added risk because I'm pushing the boundaries more that may give me some added risk. And I have to accept that. What happens when people really push that to the extreme, they'll get extreme consequences in the other systems in the body. And many times there'll be a massive bounce back. As an exercise professional, if you understand your anatomy and you understand your physiology and you understand how the systems work, and then you can say, okay, if I trigger here, this is going to have this carry-on effect, and there always has to be a positive carry-on effect to maintain the total health of my body. At the moment, obviously, we got this virus going around, and look, some people are freaking out. You see them out there; they look like people who came out of the ocean with the skin divings, with the masks and the paddles and the gloves, but if you're fit, strong, healthy, and all your systems are intact, it's not going to have any effect on you. And the statistics show that, because young, fit, strong people, they might get a sniffle and that's it. And most don't even know they even have it. The ones who are getting it, who have let the defense, or when I say your defense mechanisms, I don't just mean the immune system. I mean all the systems. Because if your immune system's falling down, it's because of a consequence of all the other systems falling down. Very rarely, unless you have a genetic autoimmune disease, then that's the extreme. But everyone else, the immune system's down because everything else is shot down. And we already know that from the statistics of productivity and sick days in the workplace. Fitter, healthier people take less sick days and get less flus than people who are unhealthy and let their body fall apart. They let themselves go, and then one of those letting go is they reduce their defense mechanisms in their body due to the fact of the immune systems come down, because all the other systems has had a carry-on effect onto that system. So I guess as an exercise professional, I understand there's certain times where an elite athlete will be very single focused and they just need to win that gold medal, but they also accept the risk there's going to be adverse effects to that for whatever that sport might be, because it's an extreme level of performance. If I'm a Formula One racer, I accept that I'm going to take my Formula car and I'm going to drive it right to the limit, and I know that that's going to have a consequence maybe on the brakes. It's going to have a consequence on maybe me crashing or the tread, and I'm going to blow a gasket or whatever it might be. I understand that, but that's that sport. But I know Warren Buffett put it beautifully in one of the chats I listened to him. He said, if you had to buy a car, only one car, and you could never buy another car, and that was the car that had to serve you for the rest of your life, the two questions I ask is, what car would you buy? What quality would it be? What standards would it be? And how much money would you invest in it, knowing you can only have one? What type of car would you buy? And the better question is, how would you look after that car to serve you for the next 80 years of your life? And I guess your body is your car. And you can replace a car. And I've had many cars. In the early cars, I probably let them run down. Now I have a beautiful car, and it runs like it's brand new, even though it's 15 years of age, but it's like brand new. It's better than most cars after 5 years, because it's a high-performance car, and I look after it, as I look after my health, because this is the car, my body is the vehicle that's going to serve me for the rest of my life. And I know if the electrical system goes, or the fueling system goes, or the tread or the tyres go, or the brake pads go, then that's going to have an adverse effect on everything else in the car. And before you know it, I have this dashboard and all the lights are coming up. And what I don't do is I never ignore the light. If I hear a noise in the engine, I don't turn up the radio. I don't cover the lights. I actually stop it, because I know that if I ignore that warning light, then that will have a carry-on effect on all the other systems in the car. And if I keep doing that, eventually that car would end up being in the wreckers. And we are mechanics. people employ us to be their head mechanic. So we can put a training intervention on the body to stimulate all the internal mechanics. The internal mechanics are the hormones and the biochemicals that get released in the body and the enzymes that get released in the body to service the cardiovascular system, the respiratory system, the muscular system, the neural system, and they service and they put things all back in alignment and they fix it up and they break that down and build that up and they build it up stronger. And the quality of the intervention, and it's not, the length of the intervention, it's the quality of the intervention. The quality of the stimulus will determine the quality of the adaptation, because we're an organism that consistently adapting to an environment. And because the environment doesn't control us anymore, where we don't have to go and chop trees down and hunt food and all that, but like hunter and gather, we have to create our own intervention that is going to be in sync or in alignment with what we want to produce, what the outcome we want, and what type of car. We are consistently building our vehicle, building our car, building our nervous system, building our hormonal system, building our skeletal system, building our muscular system, building all the systems. And I haven't covered other systems such as the reproductive system. That's another lesson. But that also involve fitter, stronger, healthier people who have a better sex life. Things such as sexual dysfunction in all areas is very much related to all the other systems. It's not just, you have a reproductive system. Well, maybe you get all the other systems into alignment first, and that one will reactivate and come in congruent and in sync with all the rest. Because like a fine, high-performance car, all of the systems should be working together. You don't just say, I don't need that one, or I'm not going to address this one. They all work together. And many times you just provide the stimulus for the overall mechanism, and the internal mechanics will fine-tune, will service your car appropriate to the stimulus that you give it. And make sure that when you give that stimulus, you're understanding what that stimulus is creating or what it's doing under the bonnet, under the skin, so you know that stimulus is going to give you the right results for all the systems, not just one system, while compromising the other systems.